But evil does exist. All right? And so the word Satana, which he's talking about, does not mean there's an evil archangel. What it means is your ego. Internal to you. You can fall out of sacred rhythm. You can fall out of an awareness of the unity, the Allah, sacred unity, the one before whom there are no others. That is your choice to do that. You can do that. But that's not the devil making you do it. That's not something external to you. That's you. It's very similar to the concept in Islam of nafs. Nafs is a form of ego. There's multiple types of nafs. Nafs, your ego, is what keeps you from submitting to the will of Allah. Islam means to submit to the will of Allah, and a Muslim is one who submits to the will of Allah. Nafs, your ego, keeps you from submitting to the will of Allah. So nafs and Satan are pretty much the same thing. Your ego. And by making a distinction about what kind of ego it is, gives you a handle on dealing with it. So Jews did not and do not proselytize or recruit people into their religion. If you like what you hear, then hang around us. But we're not going to go proselytizing. We don't do missionaries, right? But you can hang with us if you're attracted to it. So Yeshua was a Jew in the sense of cultural identification. So, for example, within Semitic languages, there are 4 Semitic languages: Hebrew, Aramaic, Arabic, Amharic. Hebrew, Arabic, Amharic, and Aramaic. So Mary was 13 and pregnant with him when she met Joseph, a widower, with children. So Jews therefore don't believe in the virgin birth thing either. So because he was a mamzer, a person of questionable parentage, that is, the product of rape or incest, he was not allowed to go to Hebrew school in his own village, nor even enter the temple in his village. So temple for his father. So for example, when Joseph dies, when Yeshua was 18, he can't even go to the funeral in the village. Because they know that Joseph wasn't your daddy. Right? So in one sense, he'd be illiterate, at least in Hebrew, up until that point, but would and could speak, teach, compose, pun, and parable in Aramaic. So he couldn't write, and that's why there's no Gospels composed by him. There's no Gospel of Jesus. No book of Jesus. He couldn't write. Because school was closed to him. Now this would piss him off, wouldn't you? Right? The guy who raised you, who you know is not your father, but you worked alongside him being a carpenter, he dies and you can't even go to the funeral? Wow. Well, that would piss me off. Right? And so there begins kind of his schism against the organized, or we would say today, corporate religion. Who makes up these rules that, just because my dad wasn't Jewish, or you don't know who my dad was, I can't go to church? Whoa. Where you get that? But that came out of a context. We need to identify who we are, and who we are is we know who our daddy and mommy is, and we know who our ancestors are. That's why all those begats in Luke and Matthew, because what they're trying to do to say that he's the Messiah, these are later people within Christianity. Okay, we need to establish a lineage going back to David. Okay, which does exist through Elizabeth, who is Mary's sister, therefore, and she's the mom of John the Baptist, cousin John. So they can trace their line back to David and Solomon. So yeah, he's a Jew, literally. But Jews don't recognize him, partially because he's a mamzer. Whether they recognize that or talk about that, that's part of the history. This came from Chilton, the Jesuit. This is the Catholic Church doctrine, right? So he couldn't write, that's why there's no Gospels. His brother James was literate and wrote. So, Allaha, some Aramaic terms, Allaha or Laha, sacred unity, the one before whom there are no others. Ruach, Holy Spirit, breath, is also found, the Spirit is also found in wind and waters, hence baptism in living water. Cousin John is basically dipping people in the River Jordan, which, as I said before, is like snow melt from the mountains, and you're in a desert. So what happens when you're in a cold-ass river? Yeah, I'm born again. Ruach, Holy Spirit. Ena, I and I. The phrase translated into the singular pronoun I, and every time Esau speaks in the King James Version of the Bible and uses the singular pronoun, in actually the original language, it's ena. So little I, big I, Allah, little I, me, big I, Allaha. So variously and simultaneously translated, me and God, you and I, we, all of us in unity, I and the Father are one, let thine I become single. Okay? The apparent duality that with your two eyes that you see is actually a spiritual unity. Kashuka, below conscious awareness, like your subconscious. Bisha, evil, unripe fruit. This is where you hit when you miss the mark. Kata, sin, you miss the target. It's an archery term. Tuf, ripe fruit. So, for example, that whole phrase about, by their fruit shall ye know them. You can tell the ripeness of a fruit by looking at it. Is it ripe and ready to eat? That's good fruit. Is it unripe, not ready to eat? Bad fruit. Who ripens fruit? You? Who ripens fruit? Nature, or the netters, or, in this framework, because this is a Natarianism, okay, this is an Abrahamic religion that he's been raised in, so who is ripening fruit? Come on, it's simple. Allah, God, yeah, right. Right? You don't ripe fruit. You don't ripen fruit. It has to ripen in its own time. Therefore, to love your enemy, you can recognize the qualities in your enemy that are unripe. Because you got them too. That's probably why they're your enemy, because you got issues with them, because you got the same issues as well. So how do you ripen your enemy? Hey, hurry up, get it together. No, you can't do that. They have to ripen on their own, and you have to participate in your own ripening. So, Satana. So sin is you miss the target. Try again. Satana, adversary, that which distracts us from the unity. So it's like the great jihad in Islam. When Muhammad talked about the great jihad, he's talking about there's inner spiritual turmoil, there's duality, there's fragmentation of light and dark. The original sin is duality of something you like and something you don't like, and the battles between polarities in your own consciousness. Okay, so the great jihad, according to Muhammad, is an internal battle with yourself. And that's the jihad you should be fighting. But most people don't want to deal with the battle in themselves. Oh, it's so much easier. Oh, the problem is you. If you aren't here, then there ain't no problem. No, the problem's in you. And that's the great jihad. Mammon does not mean money. So, for example, it means materiality, not things of the spirit. All right, so for example, within Aramaic, the same preposition in Hebrew and Aramaic means within and among. So the kingdom of heaven is within you and among your community in the all my relation sense that we know of in Turtle Island here. Love the Lord with all your heart and your neighbor as yourself, because your neighbor is yourself and part of sacred unity. So Shem means light, sound, name, atmosphere. So pray in my name is not meaning Jesus, 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 which ain't even his name, but Your name is what your mama gave you, and that's Yeshua, Yeshua, or Isho for short, or whatever your name is. Same idea. So when you see it in the Roman crosses, Yeshua depicted, and you see the INRI, what that is Yeshua Nazarete Rexius Israel. So yeah, let's see. Got that. So Aramaic primacy theorists, which I studied that's my particular bias, believe Gospels were written in Aramaic, then translated to Greek, and then Latin, the lingua franca of the Romans, as well as their trade language, Latin. Western Church Caucasianized his appearance, as well as removed or retranslated direct references to his race or ethnicity. So the image that we have of Yeshua is from Michelangelo. Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel used his uncle as the model for Jesus. So the Council of Nicaea, which is basically all of Christendom in that part of the world, which included not only Europe, but also the African and Asian parts of the church, including China as well as all of Africa, gathered with what was considered Christendom and determined what was going to be Christian doctrine. Part of that decision was to make Jesus the only begotten Son of God and kings, therefore Christ's earthly representatives. So this is very similar to the Pharaoh concept. Pharaoh's the son of God, right? And he is the political ruler, and everybody got to follow him. Pharaoh's the high priest, even though they're lesser priests, etc., etc. So Caesar, is the political leader of Rome, right? The Kaiser in Germany, same idea, Caesar, Kaiser, and then in Russian, Tsar, same concept. The divine ruler who takes his authority from Jesus, the only begotten Son of God, and Christ's early representatives, and Christ's earthly representatives. The African and Asian parts of the church were not down with this decision, saying that Yeshua was a man and others can be like him, like he taught. Greater things than these shall ye do. What's the meaning of that phrase if you think of it literally? Oh, you mean I can walk on water, fish dinners, and wine for all the wine you can drink for everybody? I can do that too. I can raise the dead and heal the sick? Okay. Sounds cool. How do I do it? Well, you got to become as a child. Well, what do you mean? I'm 35. No, you father, mother, child of true humanity. Be still. Lengthen your breath. Love your enemy. Love your neighbor and thy God as thyself, etc., etc. So the African and Asian churches are basically saying, look, he's a master teacher, not a savior. He's basically teaching the way of liberation. So basically along those lines that we talked about before, the African worldview of, okay, he's now an ancestor, he's gone through childhood, but now, because he has become an ancestor, we can still access him. That's where you get the idea of, where two or more of you are gathered in my name, my rhythm, my illumination, my atmosphere, there I am too. Okay, so Shem, again, not only name, but illumination, vibration, breath. Ancestors move into the ocean of existence at death. Unborn children move out of the ocean of existence from the invisible world into this one. And so the trick then is to maintain consciousness before death and after death so that you can choose consciously where you go. Primary part of Natarianism, and that's why physically they make mummies and preserve the organs so that the person gets reincarnated. So within liberation theology, African liberation theology rests in the reality of an African Yeshua who spoke in a context which would not be necessarily recognized as the same Christian context. So when the Aramaic African Yeshua was converted to the Greco-Aryan Jesus, more happened than just simply a name change and a language translation. A white Jesus is necessary to enable the doctrines of white European supremacy and domination of Africa, Asia, and the New World in the Americas. Because the idea, as expressed by, actually some people are even explicit about this. Columbus discovered America, and Christianity civilized the savages. So where did they get that idea? That wasn't in the original teaching, because Jesus is not conquering people. Where did that come from? Well, the Romans basically have that idea. And so when the Roman Empire fell, you had to recreate it. So we can't have, so when I have this debate with people about, well, what difference does it make what Jesus' color is? Why not be historically accurate? Okay, if you've ever been over to that part of the world, and I have, 40 days and 40 nights in a desert where it's 130 degrees in the shade, what are you going to look like if you've been there for generations? Hello? Romans depicting him with curly hair. Let's be historically accurate. Why change it to Michelangelo's uncle? What difference does it make what color he is? Right, I say that too. Why not be historically accurate? Okay, the cognitive dissonance that people experience is, right. It goes beyond what my grandfather said, people need to worship a God that looks like them. Okay, so that's cool, but what goes along with changing the image? Okay? You can say, oh, well, if we're in God's image or Jesus' image and we're white, then that means you're cursed because you're black. And that's actually a tenet of Western-based Christianity. Oh, black people are cursed because we're the son of Ham, which is Noah's son. Wait, you mean Noah was white and one of his sons was black, and because Ham saw Noah in his bath, he got cursed? And this is actually the narrative. I'm not making this up. Oh, black people are cursed by God. That's why you need to be in slavery, because you're working off your purpose, your God-given purpose is to serve us. Okay, that's a primary tenet of why Mormonism says, okay, well, we're not allowing black people into our church. Well, after we killed Joseph Smith, who had black followers with him as equals, but he gets killed. And then, oh, y'all can't be elders. You can't be in part of our church until, 1978 or the mid-'80s or whatever. Oh, well, that's nice that you let us in now, but... So, the doctrines that supported the ethnic cleansing of the Spanish Inquisition, the papal bulls establishing the doctrine of Christian nationalism, lead to the doctrines of manifest destiny, social Darwinism, and the white man's burden, and eventually to the policy called apartheid and Jim Crow. The original teachings of Yeshua where racism didn't exist. Racism and sexism did not exist in the original teaching. Were replaced by translations of the Bible which justify slavery based on race alone, with a justification that slaves were being civilized from their, quote, savage condition. So black liberation theology then positions itself in a context of social justice struggle. So the image of Yeshua becomes a critical issue. So in a world without racism as we know it, the image is depicted without prejudice in Ethiopia, which as a country, if we look at Ethiopia as a country which has practiced Christianity the longest in the world. So that's the piece. My justification for saying Christianity is an African religion. I read in the Register Guard about in the early 90s, and of course everything in the Register Guard is true. Right? But that the oldest book in the world was an Egyptian Bible that dated back to 450 AD, and it was in the British Museum. They're referring to the Peshitta. Okay, so the oldest book in the world is an Egyptian Bible, that's according to the Register Guard, and the country that has practiced Christianity the longest in the world is Ethiopia. There it is. So their image of Christ was a brown-skinned, curly-headed man. So until the creation of a united Europe, this was the historically held image. Not until the Renaissance and Michelangelo's uncle did the image change, and it was only in Europe that it changed until colonization began. So that's an Ethiopian Christ. He's raising Lazarus from the dead in this particular thing, if you look at his image. It's from the 1700s. So, Scripture is used to cosmologically explain the present. So in Christian mythology, sorry to put it that way, but there it is. The creation story is based on a number of stories, some of which are hidden within Hebrew and Jewish mystery lore. So Christians who often kind of believe that the KJV is the literal truth are mistaken because the languages the Bible was based on were multi-level, not simply literal. So other icons, so this is Mary and Jesus. This is basically out of the tradition in Europe that's referred to as the Black Madonna. That's in a Spanish church. So here's the piece with that. You go there and you ask, why is Mary black? What does that mean? And the priest there will say, well, centuries of candles and the soot from candles has made her skin black. Really? How come not the rest of it? The soot is selective just for her face and hands? All the people say, oh, well, that's a metaphor for our dark side. Come on, why did you just say she's a black African woman and let it go with that? Okay, no. Elaborate. Jesus Christ Liberator, another icon. Whatsoever you do to others what you do to the least of these, you've done to me. So Miriam of Migdala. The Gospel of, let's see, we get the next, no, we don't. Transfer to PC world and you lose the animations. All right. Adultery. This is according to the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Adultery is not having sex with somebody you're not married to. It is improperly mixing with the material world, spiritual, improperly mixing with the world. Sin is following the desires of the material world rather than nurturing your spiritual self. So adultery is illegitimately mixing your true spiritual nature with passions of the material body, which could include having sex with somebody else's wife, etc., etc. or vice versa. Sin is turning away from God towards concerns of material world and the body. For you love what deceives you. Acquire my peace within you and within yourselves, for the child of true humanity exists within you. Follow it. Those who seek for it will find it. So this is in the Gospel of Mary, which you can find in books. So according to the traditions of the ancient traditions of the East, Mary Magdalene was a wealthy woman from whom Christ expelled 7 demons. During the 3 years of his ministry, she helped support him and his other disciples with her money. When almost everyone else fled, she stayed with him at the cross. On Easter morning, she was the first to bear witness to his resurrection. Kind of presumes a close relationship. She is called equal to the apostle. She is also referred to as the beloved disciple historically. The Eastern tradition tells us that after the ascension, she journeyed to Rome, where she was admitted to the court of Tiberius Caesar because of her high social standing. After describing how poorly Pilate had administered justice at Jesus' trial, she told Caesar that Jesus had risen from the dead. To help explain his resurrection, she picked up an egg from the dinner table. Caesar responded that a human being could no more rise from the dead than the egg in her hand turned red. The egg turned red immediately, which is why red eggs have been exchanged at Easter for centuries in the Byzantine East. Now, we don't know in the West, well, actually I have an idea because I've been told this story. What does rabbits and eggs have to do with Jesus? Why the Easter bunny? Where'd the connection come from? No? Yeah, right. Well, I didn't, until I saw this, I had the connection from another source, but the idea was this. There was a German fertility goddess named Istara, or Esther. She came upon a bird who was dying. So she resurrected it, but it took the form of a rabbit. Fertility. Now, rabbits don't lay eggs, but the Easter bunny brings eggs. Fertility. Because of this particular goddess who resurrected a dying bird but changed form in saving its life and became a rabbit that brings eggs. Now, that was a pagan pre-Christian belief. And so what happens with a lot of religions is the dominant religion takes over the religion that used to be there and files off the serial numbers and then says, well, this is our story. Okay, just like Christmas. If Christ was actually born like sometime in March or April, why are we selling Christmas as birthday? Well, that was an old Roman holiday about the return of the sun. Anyway, so the Easter Bunny, and here's now another story from the Christian side that basically says this is why we dye Easter eggs. Mary traveled to the Mediterranean preaching the resurrection. Like Peter and Paul, there's one narrative where she died a martyr. There's another where she lives to 90 and dies of old age. So this icon was commissioned by Grace Cathedral in San Francisco to commemorate the election of Barbara Harris, the first woman bishop in the Anglican Communion. The inscription at the bottom of the icon reads, Saint Mary Magdalene, titles written in Syriac or Aramaic, dialect of the language spoken by Jesus. The gospel comes to us most directly not from Rome or Greece, but from the deserts of the Middle East. We owe our faith to Semitic Christians such as Mary Magdalene. And there's a reference for that. So, for example, I had this tea partier in my office, and so I asked him, because he's from Boston, why are they called the Tea Party? What was the Boston Tea Party? And he said, oh, taxation without representation, which essentially was a dispute between two groups of white people, one of whom did not have the heart to protest in their own appearance, but dressed up as Indians. Now, why did they dress up as Indians? To shift blame, right? But would the British retaliate against the Indians? No. Why? The Indians are a military power. You're an Indian country. You want to invade here, the Iroquois Confederacy? The Iroquois Confederacy was like feared all over the East Coast. Think the British are going to mess with them? No. And the British couldn't figure out, why would a bunch of Iroquois invade our ship and dump tea into the harbor when they don't drink tea? No. These are white folks doing this. Besides, so when I said Native government had universal representation, government, and no taxes. And he goes, there is no government or civilization